Welcome everyone. My name is Christina Wood. I'm Director of Programming at Communitech. At Communitech, we're working hard to bring you business as virtual as much as possible while also supporting our members the best we can. Before we kick things off today, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our courageous frontline workers for everything that they're doing in our community right now. I'm so excited to have you all on the call today as Communitech presents its Ask Me Anything session on virtual onboarding. I'm thrilled to have Chris Mulhall, VP of Talent and Organizational Effectiveness at PointClickCare, as well as a Communitech Growth Coach, join us today to share his expertise on this area of virtual onboarding. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover. We ask that you please keep your microphone on mute during the session. If you do have questions, I will open up the floor for those following Chris's presentation, where we'd like you to use the chat functionality to ask any of those questions, and Chris will get to as many of them within the hour as possible. And lastly, when Chris is presenting his presentation, it will take up the full screen. So you may want to minimize your speaker view on the right-hand side of the screen. You can find that functionality at the top in order to view the entire presentation. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon. I'm excited to get started. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Christina. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And let's start with that. Can you see my screen okay? Yes?
Not quite. Lauren, yep, there we go.
All right, perfect. Okay, very good. Well, very nice to meet everyone virtually, and thank you for having me. So as Christina mentioned, my name is Chris Mulhall. I'm the Vice President of Talent and Organizational Effectiveness with PointClickCare. So I look after talent acquisition, employer branding, workforce planning, and succession planning, to name a few. So I think sorry, go ahead.
It's not viewing.
Oh, I haven't clicked yet.
Oh, sorry.
Can you see it there?
Yep.
All right, very good. So let's start with a bit more about me and the situation for today and my workplace. So you can see the view behind me. I have some books set up. I have my Leafs picture up, although I've been told already that it might impact my credibility having the Leafs picture up, but it's in the background. You can see on the other side, it's less glamorous, right? I've got my sticky notes, I have my desk, I have my coffee, less enticing view from that side. And going on below me, down the stairs, I have 3 school-age kids. I've told them all that Daddy has a really important meeting for the next hour and to please be quiet, but it's quite possible that someone's going to show up on my Zoom screen because they are basically like magnets to it. My wife is a nurse, and so she is working today, and so hopefully they're able to contain themselves, but you never know. So that's the new normal, as they say. And so I've been with PointClickCare for 6 years, and so there's a comfort level when you think about having your kids show up on Zoom, or saying to my colleagues, I got to go help with some schoolwork for the next hour, or saying to my boss or to my coworkers, I've been on back-to-back Zooms, and I'm optional for this meeting. Is it okay if I miss it? And then you can fill me in afterwards, right? I have that comfort level. It's been 6 years there. There's credibility, there's relationships built. But I know others aren't as fortunate, certainly not those that are starting a new job right now. And so I can't imagine dealing with the stress of the pandemic, plus dealing with the fact that you're trying to onboard and put your best foot forward as a new hire. So really that's where I want to focus, is really drawing attention to how we're all not in the same boat, right? We're in that same storm. You might have seen this quote or read this article already in the last week, but your ship might be in a very different position than what mine is. And that's how it is with a lot of employees through this, and especially for a lot of new hires that are trying to be successful in their new role. So when we think about impacting new hire productivity, I think this is really important. Some of you already might be tracking new hire productivity, and for some of you, it might be a new concept. But essentially, if you think about, a new hire contribution target and say, 8 is an acceptable performance threshold. A lot of new hires, as you can see, it could take about 6 months to get there, right? I kind of base this similar to, if you're familiar with the what to expect when you're expecting, or what to expect the first year, right? At day one, as you can see, there's a bit of a dip. You're actually creating negative value because other resources are being pulled in to support your onboarding. But at 2 months, you should be able to do X, and at 4 months, you should be able to do Y, and at 6 months, if you're a baby, maybe you're sitting up, and if you're a customer success manager, maybe you're managing and running your own quarterly business review independently at 6 months. So every organization and every role has its own kind of contribution targets to get to. The challenge now is that with this quarantine period, it's taking longer for new hires to be effective, and they're not always getting to that same contribution threshold. And it has nothing really to do with being virtually remote, right? We have a lot of virtual employees that are fully productive and are high performers in our organization. It's really about being remote and all the other stressors that we're all facing right now. So the challenge becomes, how can you minimize the gap? And the best way to minimize that gap is through an effective virtual onboarding program. So for the next, say, 15 minutes or so, this is where I want to focus the efforts. Talk about how you can turn your virtual onboarding program into a competitive advantage. We'll talk a bit about tools, resources, and we're going to cover off some time at the end for the Ask Me Anything as well. So really, there's 3 key areas I want to focus on. We're going to talk about resourcing, creating resources to support the transition to remote work. We'll talk about persona-based onboarding. This might be a new concept to some of you, but I'll go through it in detail. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about building or transitioning your onboarding program to be successful virtually. And the Venn diagram makes sense because all 3 of these are interrelated, and you need to look at incorporating all 3, in my opinion, in order to build a very successful virtual onboarding program. So let's dive in. So first, as we think about supporting the transition to remote work, so much of a new hire's success is contingent on the support they get from their coworkers, right? You can build the greatest virtual onboarding platform in the world, but if you don't have the engagement and the support of your tenured employees to help drive the program, it's not going to be successful and you're not going to achieve the desired outcome. So at PointClickCare, we went about creating some self-directed resources that all employees, whether you're a new hire or a tenured employee, that people can access on a regular basis at any time. So there's 5 key pillars that we've looked at. How can we support employees to work remotely, communicate remotely, collaborate remotely, be mindful of their wellness, and also support their family care? And so these are self-directed. You can go in at any time. You can go in privately. And I'll just kind of walk through each pillar. So as we think about remote work, a lot of employees had never worked remotely before. A lot of them had questions about internet bandwidth, right? If my kids are on Netflix, how can I maximize the bandwidth and not have glitchy video? How can I ensure that I'm managing my time effectively? I'm actually logging off. What do I do at the time that I used to commute? How can I be productive in those hours without just starting work an hour earlier and ending work an hour later? So we talked a lot about building those resiliency skills as well to be effective and to demonstrate a strong work ethic. Communicating is a challenge too, right? How do you connect with coworkers when sometimes it can be harder to read body language in a Zoom, right? Sometimes people aren't showing on video, and so it can be even harder to assess how your message is being perceived. We talk a bit about crisis communications and dealing with ambiguity if you're a people leader, and the importance of establishing communication norms. When do you send an email? What constitutes being worthy of an instant message versus a text or picking up the phone? Understanding those communication norms is really important too. When we talk about collaborating remotely, I'd say this is one that we've really struggled with. A lot of organizations have. It's hard to replicate the feeling of a whiteboard session live, sticky notes, whatever the case is. It's hard to replicate that remotely. So we've talked a lot about how to still incorporate brainstorming techniques, how to use the whiteboard in Zoom or in Teams, and of course, running productive and inclusive meetings too. If you have a room full of introverted folks, you might not get that participation you were looking for. And so it's important, if you're the meeting facilitator, to ensure that you're calling on everyone and you're giving everyone the opportunity to speak up and share their opinions as well. When we talk about wellness, this is such a key topic, right? We talk about how do you invest in you and your team's mental health, the financial and economic impacts to your well-being. Ergonomic tips. This is one that's come up quite frequently too. If you're working from your kitchen table, it's not the same as having a traditional desk setup. So it's really important to support employees there. And then finally, family care. Again, we're all in different situations where maybe you have younger children that aren't even in school, or you're helping to teach, or you have aging parents. It's such a difficult transition. And again, very different than just traditional remote work, having to ensure that you're looking at these other variables that can impact your productivity. So again, supporting the transition to remote work and having a core foundation, it was really important for us to ensure that we were at least taking these elements off the table and providing resources to our employees. So you might look at these 5, maybe there's 4 you're doing great at and 1 that you're not. If you have any questions or you need any resources or I can support with providing any links, I'm happy to support as well. So after you've kind of had this foundational program in place, the next step is to really think about how can you build some persona-based onboarding. So if you're not familiar with the term, really it's about putting yourself in the shoes of the new hire using realistic scenarios to better understand their current situation, some of the risks, some of the concerns. And if you do this well, I'd say you can accomplish 2 things. So first is you can help your hiring managers to understand and empathize with the personal situations of your new hires more effectively. And second, on the hiring manager side, it helps them to recognize and modify their own behaviors so that they can show more empathy or to minimize obstacles for the new hires within their team. So it's important as you think about persona-based onboarding to think about realistic scenarios. And so I want to go through a couple examples just so you can see what I mean. So let's look at this person. She's in her first real job right now. So never really worked before in a full-time job. And so she's completely new to remote work. And she's right now, let's say she's quarantining with her friends and none of them are working right now. So there's constant distractions and she's being pulled, hey, come on, let's come have lunch with us or whatever, things that are making it difficult for her to manage her time effectively. Because her friends aren't working, they're playing games on the internet or they're streaming Netflix, and now all of a sudden she's concerned about her internet bandwidth. And the last thing she wants is in the first week is to have her video freeze up or to cut out or not be able to be effective when she's meeting people for the first time. Maybe she's highly introverted, so it's more difficult for her to interject and share her opinion. And again, she's concerned about first impressions because she's naturally very quiet and usually doesn't talk unless somebody asks for her opinion. But one thing she hasn't shared is maybe her parents have pre-existing health conditions. And so although the assumption might be that she's available and accessible, she has other commitments outside of work as well. Let's look at another scenario. Here's a primary caregiver and his partner is an essential worker. So every day, 9 to 5, he's on his own with a little one that he's trying to balance caring for and being an effective new hire. On top of that, not only is he a new hire, but he's also hired into a people leadership role. So he's trying to manage his family, build relationship with his team, and act as a leader through a time when there's a lot of adversity that his team is facing right now. With that comes an unpredictable work schedule for anyone that has small children can understand. And so he probably uses the mute button more than he'd like to, which means he's not sharing his opinion, and opinions are being formed about, well, why is he not speaking up? We hired him for his ideas. We're not hearing them. And that can lead to, well, he's going to get his work done in the evening after his baby goes to sleep. And now his team feels like they're getting emails at all hours of the night. And are they supposed to respond? Are they supposed to be online? Is this the example that should be set? Maybe this is the new normal in terms of how we manage. So you can see the challenge of having the primary caregiver persona. There's a lot of difficulties. And third, I want to look at the newly promoted manager, right? So suppose this manager is leading this employee, right? He's been with the company for 5 years, so he already has established relationships, but he lives alone and doesn't have any family commitments. And so there's an assumption that, oh, he lives alone, everything's okay, let's give more work to the newly promoted manager. And we know that's not right either. Just because there aren't the same level of family commitments doesn't mean that more work should be piled on and piled on. The newly promoted manager is struggling. He's highly extroverted, and he misses the social interactions. And so what that means is he's often booking, virtual happy hours and social get-togethers and things like that. And if you're this employee and you report into him, right, that's going to be really tough. That's the time you just got the baby down and you're supposed to be working right now, right? He's always online. Even when he's watching Netflix, his work laptop is open, so he's responding to emails in a matter of seconds, right? What kind of example is that setting, right? For maybe a new hire that's reporting in. Is this the norm? Responding to emails in seconds, right? But it's also his first people leadership role. So there's a lot of development in terms of how to coach and mentor your own team, let alone himself in helping to find his own leadership path. So those are just 3 examples of personas in the workplace, but there are so many more, and this is not an inclusive list of everything, but it's a good conversation starter. And what I'd say as well is, employees can fall into multiple categories, right? Not just one. You could be a new manager and living alone. You can see the overlap of multiple different personas. And so the challenge is really trying to figure out how can you build an inclusive and effective virtual onboarding program in support of all these different personas in the workplace. And so that was a challenge that we looked to address at PointClickCare. So for those of you that aren't familiar with our company, we are the largest SaaS platform, Canadian-owned company in terms of revenue. We are based in Mississauga. If you've come down the 401 and you saw where the old Target headquarter building used to be, there's a Pepsi sign and there's PointClickCare. That's where we're located. We have about 1,600 employees, and we'll make about 400 to 500 hires a year in a typical year, including internal hires and backfills. And the split's probably 60% tech hires and 40% non-tech hires. So what we wanted to do when we created this onboarding program is, we already had a number of committed hires in place before we even decided to transition to fully virtual work, which was about the middle of March. So I want to share a bit about some of the demographics and the splits of our hires. So if you look on the left and we look at expected location, so about 2/3 of our hires thought they were going to be hired into roles that would be based in the office. And this is important because you're already seeing a change management element that we need to address. Where they're working is not where they thought they're going to be working. And so we need to ensure that they're comfortable with that transition and set up for success. In the middle chart, you see the job function. You can see it split across a lot of different functions, our tech hires, our non-tech hires, sales, marketing, corporate functions. So it wasn't just one function that had to manage this transition. It was really across the entire organization. So again, different personas, different backgrounds, different skill levels. And so that was really important for us to ensure that all functions had a consistent approach to how we embrace our new hire onboarding. And then finally, looking at seniority, IC is individual contributors. And then we had a number of managers and senior leaders. And you can imagine as a senior leader coming in, where it's so important to build those relationships, not having those same opportunities can be difficult. So we've had 38 full-time hires since we've moved to virtual onboarding through the quarantine period. And we just had 50 co-op hires start yesterday. So the 50 co-op hires aren't reflected in these numbers, as that would skew the data significantly to individual contributors. But again, that's a persona that is certainly really important for us to get right. So as I think about our virtual onboarding, a couple questions came in advance of the Ask Me Anything about, well, what does day one look like? How do you balance an effective day one without overwhelming a new hire? So I'm not going to go through this in significant detail, but you can see a few points here. First, I'd call out looking at the medium that we use, right? There's a mixed media here. We use presentations, we use chat boxes, we use breakout rooms through Zoom, we do videos. There's just a variety of formats to keep things entertaining for new hires on the first day. But again, if anyone has questions about some of the sections that you see on the left, those are some of the categories that we looked at. The next section I wanted to cover off is about our self-directed onboarding modules. And so this is a busy slide, so I'm going to try and direct your eyes to where they can go. If you look at the top first, and we just go from ground rules across, if you're looking to build a program from scratch, these are some of the headings that you could look at focusing on. So we talk about our ground rules, which is a lot of compliance in your onboarding. There's the basics of the organization. There's better understanding our industry and the markets, our products and systems. What strategies do we use? What's our strategic planning framework? We talk about some of the human resources best practices, and then we have some of our optional sign-offs that might not be applicable to you, depending on the organization that you work for. So then if you look at the bottom, I think it's important to look at, well, what needs to be done in day 1 versus day 2 to 5 or day 5 to 90, right? So trying not to overwhelm new hires, but also ensuring that we're spreading out our onboarding over a prolonged period. So these are all virtual onboarding modules. We've moved all of these to be virtual to help support employees. Another question that came in advance of the Ask Me Anything was about what virtual onboarding technologies are we using. So one of the ones I want to talk a bit about was the one you see on the right-hand side with the phone, which I'll get to. But for our new hires and supporting them virtually, we have SuccessFactors as our HRIS. And so all employees have a pre-arrival portal. So this is where we get them to fill out their new hire paperwork. We have a welcome letter from the CEO. And really the goal there is to have less forms on day 1 so that we can really focus on improving that day 1 experience, having it really about learning the company culture, getting to meet their coworkers, getting to meet their culture buddy. All those elements are really important. And so we want to ensure that we're getting as much paperwork out of the way in advance. Then we've moved all of our online learning modules, all the ones you saw on this slide here, we've moved them to be e-learning courses. And so the nice thing about that is that we can standardize it, we can track it, we can see how much has been completed, what hasn't. And one of the interesting things that we've noticed so far since going to the virtual model is that these modules are being completed faster and faster, which we don't necessarily see as a good thing. What we take away from that is they probably have more downtime. Maybe they're not getting the same level of check-ins from their managers or from their culture buddy. But we want to ensure that they are completing that, but not so quickly because they have nothing else to do and they're not having the touch points that they should be having with other employees in their business unit or other stakeholders they'll be working with. We also have a social networking piece, which is Jam, if you're familiar with that. So that's a chance for new hires to collaborate with other new hires, for managers to share best practices as they're onboarding new employees. So it's kind of like a social networking portal that we use. The next one is pretty unique. It's this Org Links, which is a mobile app that we use. And we use it for new hires to help complete some of the boring or standard tasks, right? So how do you, they basically have like a gamification where they have it's kind of like a scavenger hunt, if you've done any of those scavenger hunts, using apps, right? So they need to go and complete a task and then take a picture of it and then upload their picture to show. So for example, some of the tasks are fun, like draw a picture of your HR business partner. So you have to go and find them and do a sketch of them, take a picture of it and upload it. Some of them are more tactical, like change your password, or go find an employee that's worked at PointClickCare for 5 years or greater and find out why they still work here and what they enjoy about work. And then, yes, some basic things like, find where's the photocopier, take a picture of the photocopier. So you get a chance to include some of the basics, but in a bit more interactive and fun way. And then finally, we use Zoom. Pretty self-explanatory there, but we do use all the different modules within it. So we have the whiteboarding, we do a lot of polling, we do breakout rooms as well. The breakout rooms are really important because every new hire gets a culture connector buddy whose role over the first 90 days is to help support that new hire to be immersed in our company culture. And then the culture buddies join the onboarding session and they get a chance to go in their own breakout room and the activity is to talk about things they have in common and share some ideas and really just get to know each other and really build the foundation of a future relationship to support the onboarding. So I want to talk a bit about some of the advice that we've had from hiring managers and then also from candidates. Some of the key themes that we've heard and we've learned from since moving to a fully virtual onboarding module. So first, I talked a bit about the culture buddy, and some of the feedback from hiring managers was, you know what, it's great that we have a culture buddy, it's great that the hiring manager plays a role, but we need to ensure that we're spreading out those touch points to other employees as well, especially given everything we talked about earlier with those personas. Not everyone has that capacity in their own bandwidth to support. And so ensuring that, yes, it's great to have a culture buddy, but maybe you could have 2 or 3, or ensuring that you're spreading out the onboarding training to multiple people was a takeaway that we heard more than once. Another was to, and I thought this was a good tip, when you send out that org announcement to say, you know, Chris is going to be joining the company, include a call to action to the employees receiving that, to reach out to the new hire directly, book time with them if they need to. And so that way there's less onus on the manager to go ahead and schedule all these meetings themselves. And so you can send that out in multiple groups. So maybe not the whole company receives a call to action, otherwise the calendar is going to be pretty populated, but maybe starting with a small group of people that you do want them to spend some time with. And then you can send out a subsequent larger announcement where you don't have a call to action included. This was one that came up as well. Ensure that you have a backup plan if equipment doesn't arrive on time. So if we're doing virtual onboarding, can they log in through their personal email? And if so, how do we ensure that we have the right single sign-on access to allow that person to do that? So again, really just contingency planning, or if they're getting a cell phone, you're at the mercy of your cell phone provider and when it gets shipped. So again, ensuring that if they don't have a cell phone, can they still be effective in their role is another example. The other part that we talked about was, similar to the call to action, is not booking employees in back-to-back meetings. So again, if you are going to do that, I think it leads really into the next point as well, which is to if you are booking meetings for them, try and book them 5 minutes past the hour to allow your employee to make a good first impression. I did hear this from multiple hiring managers and new hire employees. I think I touch on the next slide as well. But a lot of them were saying, you know what, my meeting went till 2:04 and then I had to join the call late and it was the first time I met somebody. I didn't make a great first impression. I really wish I had that meeting all over again, right? And it's such an easy thing to address if you just book your meetings at 2:05. I mean, really, what's the difference between a 55-minute meeting and a 60-minute meeting, right? I think meetings, as we know, seem to expand to the time that they're allocated for. And this is a great example of ensuring that you're helping that new hire put their best foot forward. And then last, it's hard, right? It's hard for employees to be successful during the quarantine period to build relationships and establish credibility. So it's really important that you continue to appreciate them, give them acknowledgement, and let them know that it's difficult out there and you're here to support them. Again, that was one that came up from multiple hiring managers. On the new hire side, I want to go through their list as well. Similar to the last point, wherever possible, new hire suggested to join meetings early to introduce yourself if you haven't met the attendees yet. It's a great way to, not just strictly talk business right from the get-go, but to build some early relationships, get to know the person a bit better, and that way, as new people are joining the Zoom, you're all kind of like that greeter, right? You're that first face that they see when they join the call. I thought this was really good advice as well. Where after the meeting, when you meet someone for the first time, asking them, can you introduce me to somebody else that I should also know? Or are there any slide decks that you have that might help with my onboarding? So beyond the traditional standard HR onboarding, what else would help them to better understand the business? Where it could be quarterly business reviews, it could be other slide decks, it could be anything that might help them to better understand and have a quicker acclimation. And again, with the goal of reducing that time to productivity. This one's pretty straightforward, and a lot of folks are already doing this, right? Networking with other recent hires that have joined the company virtually, but also better understanding, well, what worked, what didn't, what would you do differently if you could do it again? And I think it's really important to address this not just with new hires that started 2 weeks before you, because again, the sample size is pretty small, right? But people that have graduated through that probationary period, or maybe 6 months in role, maybe they haven't gone through a fully virtual onboarding, but it's still important to understand, what would you do differently, or given our transition to virtual onboarding, what do you think I should be particularly mindful of? And we talked about communication norms earlier in the slide deck, but this is really important too, to better understand when should I send emails? When do I use instant messages? What about video? Is it ever okay to pick up the phone, right? There's a lot of new hires, right? As I think about the 50 co-ops that we just brought on board, they're not likely to pick up the phone to ask for any questions, right? So is that expected? If my phone rings, does that mean it's an emergency? So just better understanding the communication norms, I think, is really important as well. And then as well, asking your manager what success looks like at day 30, 60, and 90. It's not easy. And if you think to that time to productivity slide, as hiring managers, we need to look at level setting our expectations to say, what, it might take a bit longer, just given things are a bit different and that people have personal commitments as well. So what does success look like in day 30, 60, and 90? Are there, tangible business goals? Is it more about understanding the business? I think those are really important questions to ask if you're a new hire and looking to get some guidance from your manager about how to be set up for success. So with that in mind, Christina, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can open up the Ask Me Anything.
Great. Thank you so much for your insights today, Chris. We really appreciate you joining us.
Great, thanks.
So I'll turn it over to the audience on the call. If anyone has any questions that they would like Chris to answer, please type them into the chat box. And I will do my best to moderate and get to all of your questions. While we're waiting for people to think of questions and type them into the chat, Chris, maybe I'll just ask you if there are any companies you can think of that are doing virtual onboarding really well right now, where you could share some of the best practices that you're seeing from them.
Sure, yeah. There's a lot of resources out there right now. If I think of some of the ones that I found most impactful, I don't know if anybody from Vidyard is on the line, but I know Lisa Brown created just an amazing resource for onboarding. I'm sure it's posted on the Vidyard blog, but if you can't find it, if you just Google Lisa Brown and Vidyard and onboarding, it'll likely pop up. So I thought that was a great resource and I highly recommend it. There's a really nice video component to it as well.
Great. And I think Michelle just shared that link on the chat if anyone's interested. One question has come in. Chris, what do you do to ensure that the culture company is transferred correctly and positively to newcomers?
Sure.
I think it's meant to say company culture, sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. And not easy, right? You lose some of that when it's fully virtual. And so, I guess a couple tips I would give. Number one, our organization, as I mentioned, has a culture connector buddy. And so it's really important that you are identifying a culture buddy that exhibits the cultural values that you think are really important for that new hire to learn about. And we've seen it just like there's better interviewers in a company, there's better culture connector buddies in a company as well. And so really important to think about who demonstrates those values and ensuring there's regular touch points every week. As well, we have that kind of gamification, that app that we use for new hires, and thinking about some of the questions that we ask there, where you're to go to a person that has a certain amount of years of tenure and get their perspective, or talk to someone who joined less than a year from now and get their perspective, and just better understanding the company, understanding our customers. And so really, I think taking a more prescriptive approach to identify who you'd like them to spend time with that truly embody the cultural values that you want to share. I think that's really important to ensure that you're getting that culture connection accurate.
Great. The next question kind of ties into that. So how do you measure company culture virtually?
Well, so we use an employee engagement survey where a big component of that is looking at company culture. I can't say that we've done a full company-wide engagement survey post COVID to kind of correlate the two. We have done a leadership accountability index one, so more about evaluating our people leaders during this period and helping to ensure that employees are getting the right support they need. So it really depends on how frequently you do surveys and ensuring that you're asking similar questions time over time to get a true overall metric. So really for us it's these employee engagement surveys, but we also for new hires we do survey them afterwards, right? And we ask them a lot of questions like, is the company that you're working at the company you thought you were joining, right? Or did the recruiter mislead you into what this company culture was really like? Same with the manager. Did they give a realistic preview? We look at things like new hire turnover, both in terms of voluntary and involuntary turnover as a key barometer of kind of cultural success, right? Do we give them a realistic preview of both what's great about PointClickCare, but also what might be challenging? And we always do direct our employees, our candidates, when we're in that courting phase, to go to our Glassdoor page, and not just to review the good reviews, but also look at the negative ones. What are people saying about us? Are there any concerns there? And so that employees have a chance to really understand the company culture before they decide to sign the offer letter.
That's great. Another follow-up question was, what are some of the metrics that you care about for culture? And I heard you mention a few. Are there any other specific metrics that you're looking at with respect to culture?
Well, yeah, I think really overall engagement, leadership engagement, those come across in our employee engagement surveys. I talked about new hire turnover as a metric to ensure that we're hiring folks that are both the right fit in terms of culture and in skill set. Really looking at kind of a manager or a company NPS score. We typically ask that within our engagement survey. So how likely are you to recommend PointClickCare as a place to work for, and how likely are you to recommend your manager as someone to work for? So those are two metrics that we really put a lot of stock in, and not just a metric, but building corrective action plans that come out of those scores.
Great. And then a follow-on is thinking about performance reviews and one-on-ones. Do you have any advice for doing those virtually?
Sure. If we think to, first of all, performance management, again, if you think to that slide I showed with kind of the time to productivity and the thresholds, I think being pretty clear about what success looks like is really important. Again, this is going to be a really hard year for performance reviews because, again, if someone doesn't have family commitments and they're working more hours, how do you weigh that against somebody who has other personal commitments but is still trying to do their best with the time they have allotted, right? It's going to be really difficult. So what I will say for doing virtual performance reviews, I mean, first and foremost, using video wherever possible, right? You want to ensure that getting a chance to communicate face-to-face through video. And then as we think about one-on-ones, same thing. Allowing time as you better understand the personas, I think is really important, right? If you think back to all the reviews that you do or all the one-on-ones that you do, really understanding the personas of each individual and allowing them to open up and say, how are you doing? Anything you want to talk about? Here's these resources do you know these resources are available if you need any support? Is there anything you want to talk to me about? What do you need more of or different from me is a question I like to ask, right? So it's not a yes/no question, or I'll say, what 3 things do you need more of or different from me, right? So it forces them to give feedback so that I can help set them up for success as well. So really, I think it's a lot of trying to ask these open-ended questions and not going straight into business, in the first minute of your one-on-one.
It's great advice. The next question we have here is, can you speak more to Leadership Accountability Index? Like what kinds of questions would go into the index and the surveys?
Sure. Oh, that's a good one. So since I do not facilitate that, I am not the best person to go through the full question list, but I do get my own score. So I'm thinking to my own results. As I think about some of the key questions, a lot of the key themes are, my manager provides direct feedback on my work. My manager provides recognition, or I feel recognized by my manager for the work that I perform. My manager does an effective job communicating organizational strategy. I can give more and more. So whoever asked that question, I'm happy to talk offline, and I can even get you some of the questions that we use if you're looking to incorporate Leadership Accountability Index to your org.
Great, thank you. Another question has come in from Michelle. What about virtual onboarding would you like to see live on past the pandemic?
Right, good. I think if you remember on the one slide where I had those 5 pillars, where it listed, those resources that are available. One of the ones that I think really will resonate post the pandemic really is running effective and inclusive meetings, right? So many organizations we're already starting to see are shutting down their offices, right? So virtual work is going to continue, but we're all going to be at the mercy of how effective that meeting organizer is, right? If everybody's on mute and not participating, or if the introverted folks are less likely to speak up unless the meeting facilitator says, Christina, what are your thoughts, right? And you have that floor. And so I think it's really important to ensure that some of the best practices we're putting in place today for virtual onboarding, we can incorporate ongoing, because I do think we're learning a lot about how to communicate effectively, and to the slides I showed on the personas, really ensuring that you're tailoring it to the folks within your organization or your direct reports.
Great. We have some comments coming in. People are really enjoying the conversation. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like Chris to answer? What are your thoughts on working from home past COVID?
Well, I live in Guelph, and my employer, as I said, is at the old Target headquarter building. So I'm loving that, minus trying to learn grade 6 math all over again, which is a lot harder than I thought. But I really, really believe it. So what I'll say is this. I mean, I'm on the talent side, and it's such a competitive advantage if you can hire talent regardless of where it's based geographically, right? You're not bound by hiring Toronto market rates, right? Just because you have an office there. And I find, it really varies from organization to organization and from leader to leader, right? Do they need to see that person in person, or can they effectively manage them remotely too? And so I really believe that organizations that embrace remote work and do this virtual onboarding effectively, they have a great business case to say, listen, that productivity gap, right, post-COVID, it's the same or even better, right? Because you're not spending 2 hours a day commuting. And so you think of the productivity gained through remote work. So I'm a big believer in it. As we think about the future of work, I think we're going to see it more and more frequently. And I think the HR programs just need to be in place, whether it's virtual onboarding, culture buddies, measures of success. What does success look like day 30, 60, 90, 6 months in the role? The more that we can do as a collective HR group in building these mechanisms to say, I can measure success, and tangibly I'm seeing an improvement in our virtual workers because we removed these barriers. I really think we're going to see more and more remote work, and I'm excited about it myself.
Great. We have a few more questions coming in here. So does your company cover costs associated with getting set up from work from home and ongoing costs such as internet?
Ooh, good question. So we first, on the first part, yes. So we'll ship equipment. We'll use a typical courier like a FedEx to get equipment set to employee and provide a monitor and provide a laptop, provide the resources they need. For those that have always been in a dedicated remote role, pre-COVID, we did provide that for employees. Now, yes, we've also offered a subsidy to help support them if they need anything to set up their home office, whether it's at a kitchen table or on another floor.
What are some ways that PointClickCare is managing wellness remotely, especially in terms of mental health?
Great question, especially with it being Mental Health Week as well, too. So there's a number of initiatives. I would hate to leave them out, so I'm happy to chat with whoever asked that question, or if just in general. Christine, I think this would be a great resource to share out for everyone. So I certainly don't want to miss so many good things that we're doing, because we have a Total Rewards team that's done a great job with this. But you know, we use that Headspace app. We've done a lot. I'd categorize it into kind of physical well-being, mental well-being, financial well-being, right? Just providing financial advice during times of economic downturn. You know, for the recruiters, we're not hiring like we were before. And so as a service to our employees, the recruiters turned into outplacement consultants. So if employees had direct family members that lost their job, they could engage with one of our recruiters to get their LinkedIn makeover or redo their resume, go through a mock interview. So we offer that service to our employees and their direct family members in case someone lost their job. And our recruiters have the capacity to do it right now. So that was another element that we offered that was pretty unique. But in terms of overall wellness programs, I'd love to provide more resources, because there's quite a few that I think are worth sharing out.
Great. So maybe we can share that out after, along with your elements of your presentation. And I think also people were interested in the Leadership Accountability Index as well.
Great.
I'm just looking at the questions here. What keeps you up at night in your current role, Chris?
Well, you know, one of the struggles that we have is, you know, if hiring is slowing down, how do you balance reaching out to candidates and building that pipeline and keeping them engaged without being misleading about when you can formalize and make a hire, right? And so, you know, there's a lot of great talent on the market right now, and we all know that. But we don't want to be misleading about when we can hire for it either. So I think finding that balance of trying to build talent pipelines, engage with great candidates, with also hoping to keep them warm for an extended period, that's probably one of the biggest challenges I see. You know, certainly there's not a lot of turnover in the market right now, so you're not seeing a lot of backfill hires right now. But we know that there's less noise in the recruitment market now than there was 3 months ago. And so trying to figure out how best to navigate that to still, you know, articulate your employer brand, but at the same time be supportive if you don't have a job for them right now. I think finding that balance is unique, and that's something that, you know, it shouldn't be keeping me up at night, given, you know, how trivial it seems given everything else in the world, but it's certainly something that is challenging from a recruitment perspective.
Great, thank you for that. We have another question that's come in. What is your advice around participants using or not using the video feature on remote calls, so Zoom calls or whatever?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I guess this is probably one thing that I've changed my advice or changed my perspective on a bit. And it wasn't really until I started doing more work and research into those personas, right? Where I always said, oh, you should always be on Zoom and go on Zoom. But again, there are folks that are, you know, they're not comfortable right now. Maybe they have a child sitting on their lap, right, as they're listening to this, right? And so, and they prefer not to be on video. But if they're engaged and they're participating and they're taking the information in, then I think that's acceptable, right? And I think we have to be comfortable with the fact that, you know, there's different comfort levels, and although you might be comfortable, you know, being on video for one call, it doesn't mean you have to be on it for the next one. So I think that's one that I've really changed my own perspective on, is as much as I used to be 100% video, you need to be on video. I think showing more empathy to those that aren't on video for a reason, I think is important.
If I can share, I've also heard at Communitech, some of our companies talk about their people leaders going on taking phone calls instead of video calls, so that, you know, employees can go for a walk while they're on the call, so that, you know, less screen time also as an option. As people are sitting in front of the computer all day on video, it can be a lot for some people. So giving people different options where they need it.
That's great. That's good advice.
I don't see any new questions in the chat. So if anyone does have another question that they'd like to get in for Chris before we wrap up at 3 o'clock today, please enter it into the chat now. One other question I did have for you, Chris, was are there any pitfalls with virtual onboarding that you would recommend that people avoid? Is there anything that they shouldn't do?
Yeah, I think there's we've put this artificial pressure on, you know, to accelerate time to productivity, right? And I think what happens when we do that is we shift everything on that chart to the left, right? And I guess it's backwards if I'm on the screen. And you know, what was expected to happen on day 5, day 14 is now being crammed into day 1, 2, and 3. And I've heard that from new hires where they just felt really overwhelmed with the amount of meetings. They've been glued to their chair, right? And they never really had a chance just to, you know, to take it in, to respond to all the welcome emails, right? All those things that you'd like to do in that first week. And so I think one of the key challenges, again, if you use instant messenger, a lot of people I find, you know, they just ignore that red dot that says busy, right? And you just get message after message after message, right? And that's how it is right now. And so I think being cognizant of not overwhelming a new hire's calendar in the first week is really important. Because I think it's a pitfall today, given the amount of information that new hires are trying to absorb, given everything else that's going on in their lives as well.
Great. So I'll put out a call one last time for any final questions before we wrap up. If you would like to speak to Chris further, you can connect with your Communitech Start and Scale Advisor, or CSM. So if you don't know who that is, please connect with the CEO or head of HR in your organization, and they should know who your main contact is at Communitech, and we're happy to put you in touch with Chris. We will also share out the information requested following this call.
Great, and happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn as well if you'd like as well, if we're not already connected. If we are, send me a note, and if we're not, I'm happy to connect with you too. Really appreciate everyone joining.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today, Chris. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing all of your insights on this new topic as everyone's venturing into hiring virtually. So thank you again for joining, and thank you to all of those who attended today. We really appreciate you joining and asking your questions.
Great.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.